Hi everyone, welcome back to Java 1 for All. In this video, we are going to continue the exceptions topic. Actually, we are going to continue for a while because there are a lot of things to talk about it. But before we start, let's go back here, and I want you to be careful, especially if you are taking an exam or someone is evaluating your Java skills, when you talk about error and exception. Errors, they are not exception. In Java terms, they are not exception because they are not subclass of the exception class. So we can talk about, for example, a Stack Overflow error happened in a sense of an exceptional case happened. So we have an exception that is a Stack Overflow error. If you're talking a sense that is an exceptional case, it's okay, but you have to be careful because if someone is trying to test your skills, error is not an exception. So just be careful with that because error is not a subclass. Just because of that. And now we are going to talk about runtime exceptions. But before we talk about runtime exceptions, I want to make some structural changes here. Let's create a new package, not under test, but let's create a package called error.test, and we move this Stack Overflow here. And on test, just press Shift F6, and you add runtime and then .test. And now let's create a new class called RuntimeException test01. Okay, so there are two things you should be careful when working with runtime exceptions and exceptions specifically. Both of them are exceptions, but that is something that we call checked and unchecked. What's checked and unchecked? All the exceptions that are directly under exception, they are what we call checked exceptions. What is checked exception? It's an exception that if you do not do something, if you do not treat that, if you do not put a try catch, we are going to learn that later, your code will not compile. So you should do something for that exception. Otherwise, Java will say, it's impossible for you to compile this program because you are not taking the measures that should be taken for this exception. For example, IO exception is an exception related to files most of the time. And if you're trying to create a file, Java will say, okay, there isn't a possibility that an IO exception will happen. It can be like for any reasons. You don't have write permission, the path doesn't exist, and so on. But what matters is if you do not treat that IO exception, the Java compiler will not let you run your code. And unchecked exceptions are exceptions that are under or it is a runtime exception. So everything from runtime, including runtime, down is what we call unchecked. And most of the time, unchecked exceptions, if it's the program that is throwing that to you, it's like a programmer's, a developer's problem. So for example, no pointer exception. No pointer exception is when you are trying to execute a method or call a variable from a reference variable that does not have any object being referenced. Number format exception is when you try to change a string to a number, but let's say you are trying to change the letter A into a number. You have number format exception. Class cast exception we saw when we try, for example, to change it to put a computer into a tomato reference. We have class cast exception. And index out of bound exception is when you try to access a position that does not exist, but is not for an array. This one is for lists. So basically, as you can see, all these problems could be avoided if you as developer took the right measures, either creating the object, either checking if it's a number, either checking if the object belongs to the inheritance tree, or if the object is what you're expecting, or if you have enough values to call that position. So all these problems can be avoided if you take the right measures. So that's why usually runtime exception is a problem that the developer is causing. So let's see, for example, no pointer exception. I have here the docs from Oracle. This is the official documentation. And as we can see, we have the no pointer exception. And basically, it tells you when this no pointer exception can happen. So apart from that, it tells you the whole inheritance tree. And as you can see, it's part of the runtime exception. And if we click on runtime exception, you will notice that we have a lot of runtime exceptions. So basically, almost all these exceptions, they are the ones that can happen in your program. Most of them, honestly, I never saw in my life. For example, I never saw this VM out of memory exception or VM mismatch exception. But some of them, it will happen like so many times that you will probably memorize them even if you don't want. So all these exceptions, they are unchecked because they are under runtime exception. And for example, we can see exceptions happening if we force them. For example, let's go back. Now, as you can see here, runtime exception and its subclasses are unchecked exceptions. Unchecked exceptions do not need to be declared in a method or constructor. So we are going to see about the throws later. So for example, let's see no point interception. So we have object, that's a reference variable that has no object being referenced. And if you try to call one of the methods that we have inside that object reference, for example, toString, you are going to get no point interception. And as you can see, we have the stack. In this case, the stack is happening at the main method. So as you can see, main line number 7. If I click, IntelliJ is bringing me exactly where it's happening. Now, another exception. Let's say we have an array. And I'm trying to access a specific position that does not exist. We're going to get array index out of bound exception. So as you can see, runtime exceptions, they can happen for any number of reasons, but usually the reasons are because you as developer are not taking the proper measures to avoid them. So just remember, for this class, to just wrap it up, we have errors, exceptions. Error is not an exception because it's not a subclass. Runtime exceptions are the unchecked exceptions, and the exceptions that are directly being subclassed, including the exception, they are what we call checked exceptions. That means if you do not handle them, you are going to have a compilation error. So this is what I have to remember for this class. Let's continue in the next video. Bye.